Boldwood presents Sunrise with the Silver Surfers, written by Maddie Please and read by Penelope Freeman. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. That morning I entered Heathrow Terminal 5 with a thrill of excitement. I'd made it this far without anything going wrong. Now all I needed was to get on the right plane. With all the security and checks, was it actually possible to get on the wrong plane? Knowing my luck, I probably could. This time I could enjoy the bustle of people, the sound of the announcements. I could check the departures board as often as I liked without Tom at my elbow, tutting and sighing and telling me to keep a close eye on my case, otherwise it would be taken away and blown up. I know people complain about queues and delays, but I love airports. They always make me feel optimistic. Go through those gates and anything could be possible. A week in the south of France, a fortnight in the Greek islands, a road trip around New England. I particularly liked the sound of that. I'd always wanted to do one. I hadn't actually travelled very much since coming to England all those years ago. There were school holidays for us all to consider and the resulting and very unfair increase in the price of flights. And of course, worse than that, Tom never fancied the places I suggested we might visit. We'd managed to take a few package holidays over the years. Tom thought it was important our son Dan should be able to brag to his classmates about visiting Disney or Paris or Venice. But we never explored the places I wanted to see. Picturesque French villages with adorable boulangeries, or the soaring beauty of the Italian lakes, or the twinkling Christmas markets of Germany. Having watched my ex-husband on our last budget flight together to Jersey to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary, it confirmed my belief that the real reason was he was terrified of flying, but wouldn't admit it. Even when he almost pulled the arms off the seat when we took off. I swear he was doing little running movements with his feet, although he denied that too. This time, it was going to be different. For one thing, I was travelling alone, without Tom sweating or complaining about the size of the airline seats and couldn't I budge over a bit, without Dan wanting crayons, aged 8, snacks, aged 14, or more legroom, aged 18. That morning I was, of course, far too early. That's just me. I was even early 34 years ago, when Tom and I were married, and I had to sit in the car behind the village hall until my bridesmaid, my younger sister Rowan, pretty in Liberty print, told me he'd arrived. He'd insisted we were married in Gloucestershire because his mother was too frail to travel to Australia. Sylvia always was too frail to do anything that didn't suit her. In hindsight, I should have done things differently. But I had been in love with a handsome man who seemed mature, stable, and confident, while I was none of those things. Thinking back, I didn't seem to have much of a say in anything. He always claimed to have swept me off my feet. It was only later that I realised this isn't always a good thing. I wasn't going to think about that, not today. I was single again, back out in the world, and this holiday was going to be different. Slightly scary, but very exciting at the same time. I was going on a proper adventure. After all those years, I was going back to Australia to see my family. Joyce was an elderly lady who used to walk her dog in the park next to the house Tom owned, and after my divorce I'd moved to live just down the road from her. My new neighbour Lizzie and I had kept a special watch on her in her last months when she was housebound, doing her shopping, taking her meals, and helping her put her photos in some sort of order. She had literally thousands, many of them still in the paper envelopes from Timothy White's or Boots. Black and white pictures of her smiling in front of the pyramids or Machu Picchu or various statues of Buddha in Thailand. And later, colourful snaps of her in Hawaii, Hong Kong and New York. How wonderful to have seen so many places. "There's a lot of world out there, Ellen," she'd said. "You must see it, and so should Dan. You're a young, healthy, attractive woman in your prime. Make the most of it before it's too late." Fat chance of that, when my husband hadn't even bothered to renew his passport. But then, exactly a year after the ink was dry on my divorce from Tom, Joyce died. And much to Tom's frustration, she had left me a considerable amount of money that he couldn't get his hands on. And she left the same for Lizzie so she could get her leaking roof fixed. Along with my bequest was a letter of wishes from her with the strict instruction that I must use some of it for travel. So that's what I was doing. Standing on a bright June morning, having got rid of my big suitcases, hanging on to my cabin bag, reading the notice about things I was not allowed to take on board with me: swords, stews, shaving foam or pepper spray, and plucking up the courage to go through security. Evidently, I passed the looking dangerous and requiring a strip search test, and was allowed through to departures without incident. Then I made my way, heart-thumping, to the business class lounge, because for the first time in my life I had upgraded my seat. Tom would never have allowed it, not in a million years. When he did travel, he preferred to go for the cheapest airline in the cheapest seats, and then complain all the way there and back about the discomfort. I mean, it wasn't as though we couldn't have afforded to upgrade to perhaps premium economy, but we never had. On our ill-fated trip to Jersey, he had complained about having sciatica, a bad back, and possibly a deep vein thrombosis after an hour's flight. And yes, it did rather ruin the mood for the rest of the week as we both anticipated the return trip. It was absolutely miles to the business class lounge. Perhaps really rich people had the use of electric carts, or perhaps there were special secret entrances somewhere. I had a good look around to see who was coming with me and didn't see anyone remotely famous. At least the moving pavements were working, and I could stride briskly out, feeling a silly sense of triumph as I passed the people who had chosen to just walk. I resisted the impulse to walk backwards on it or pretend to be swimming, something I'd seen on social media once. Perhaps it wouldn't be so amusing if I fell over and got my clothes tangled up in the slats. Heathrow Airport declares incident as woman eaten by travelator. I eventually found myself in a calm, quiet armchair-strewn lounge with a wonderful view of the runway and the ground crew. There is always one man in a high-vis jacket and ear defenders standing around next to the plane, apparently not doing anything. I was delighted to see he was still there, still apparently doing nothing. There were free meals and drinks. OK, it was only 11:30 in the morning, but would Madame like some champagne? Yes, indeed, Madame jolly well would. I collected a glass and went and sat in one of the squishy leather armchairs overlooking the runway. I looked around. Had anyone noticed I was travelling alone? Did they wonder about me in the same way I wondered about other people? Or had I just disappeared into the background as a lone, middle-aged woman? Everyone else seemed to have someone to talk to. There were even a few children rushing about, seemingly used to this sort of thing. I wondered what Dan would think if he could see me. But then I began to enjoy myself. No one needed anything from me, or couldn't find their car keys, or wanted to know where I was, until I was halfway down the glass of bubbly, and my mobile pinged. Tom. Of course it was Tom. The reality of our divorce didn't seem to make any difference to him now he was dissatisfied with his new life and sleep-deprived. Ashley had smugly announced her pregnancy with astonishing speed after their wedding. Considering it had taken me 6 years to get pregnant, I didn't know Tom had it in him. Nor did he, I suspect. Starting again at the age of 60 with a new baby, a 35-year-old wife, and with a 28-year-old son to explain himself to, can't have been easy. "Where are you? I was hoping to catch up." I ignored him. Recently I've decided it's the best way. Why my ex-husband still thought I wanted anything to do with him after the way he behaved is a mystery. It was like I was some sort of comfort blanket for him. Another ping. Ellen, I need to speak to you. Are you at home? I might pop in. I sighed and replied. I think like most women my age, I am a people pleaser. It can be a real problem, but in a strange kind of way I wanted him to know that I was doing something exciting. I'm at Heathrow, drinking champagne. Very funny. So is 5:30 okay? Maybe closer to 6? I won't be in. So when will you be in? No idea. I went to look at the food displays and was suddenly hungry. It was nearly 3 hours until the flight, and I had been up since before dawn, so I might as well have a little something. Rude not to, really, when they'd gone to all that trouble. I decided on a smoked salmon and cream cheese bagel, a low-fat, I do need to keep an eye on my cholesterol, and a chocolate brownie, washed down with more champagne. Outside I could see the white and gold bulk of a huge plane being loaded with suitcases and pallets of stuff. Food, perhaps? Sparkly, exciting things? Ping! Ellen, what time will you be home? Foolishly, perhaps it was the champagne, I relented and replied again. No idea. What exactly do you want, Tom? You see, my impulse to show off was backfiring on me. I was opening up a conversation with him when I didn't want one. I'm in the middle of some really serious stuff here, and I've had about 10 minutes sleep in the last week. I think Josie is teething or something. I don't remember Daniel making such a song and dance about it, or about sleeping. I could do with a bit of sympathy and a strong gin and tonic. Then have one. I shouldn't have replied. I should have turned my phone off. I should have blocked his number months ago. But I'll admit occasionally seeing his increasing dissatisfaction with his new soulmate gave me a certain schadenfreude. Perhaps that's not very kind of me. I don't suppose you'd make lasagna for me this evening, would you? Extra special, pretty please. Ashley's having a go at being a vegan and it's killing me. She says it's healthy, but I feel quite faint half the time. Oh dear. I smiled to myself. How simply frightful. Tom had always said a meal without a chunk of meat on his plate was merely a starter. Perhaps Ashley wasn't quite as amenable as I had been. What are you doing, Ellen? I told you. I'm at Heathrow. I'm going to Australia for 2 months. I'm in the business class lounge at Terminal 5 drinking champagne. Tom assumed radio silence. I wouldn't be surprised if he had fainted. I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself and my adventure. The room was busier now, with people sitting by the window, drinking coffee and chatting. A few were working on their laptops, a couple were on their mobiles. A tiny Japanese woman at a nearby table was eating noodles with chopsticks as though her life depended on it. Some people were dozing. It was all very pleasant. No one was shouting or pacing about or asking me for anything. Ping. Business class? Are you completely mad? Why would you want to go back to Australia after all this time? Ellen, when are you back? I sighed. 1. No, I'm not completely mad. 2, because I want to see my family again. And 3, MYOB. The little dots at the bottom of the screen to show a reply was on the way, appeared and then disappeared. Evidently Tom was offended or outraged. Well, tough. I might have been swept off my feet once, but my size 5s were firmly back on the ground now. A very nice-looking man who had been standing looking out of the window came to sit opposite me. Not that I usually take notice of these things, but he was tall and tanned and rather lovely. Business-class travellers could certainly be eye-catching. He leaned towards me and I gave him a nervous smile. You don't mind? He said with a broad white grin. He had great teeth and a faint Australian accent. What did he want? Perhaps he was going to be on my plane. Maybe he had spotted me across the room and taken a shine to me for some reason. If he was attracted to short-sighted, recently acquired contact lenses, 58-year-old women who perhaps should have fitted in a haircut before their holiday. No. He wanted something, didn't he? Men always use charm and smiles when they want something. Mind what? I said, a bit flustered. He smiled again and pointed to the wall next to me. I hate to disturb you, but I need the power socket. My laptop's nearly out of charge. Oh, of course not. Help yourself, I said, flushing a bit, and he messed about with cables before he started typing. I wondered what he was doing. I allowed myself the sort of fantasy that had always irritated Tom when he saw I wasn't paying proper attention to him but had zoned out. Perhaps the Australian was a high-powered businessman on his way to an important board meeting. In Sydney, in an office with a fabulous view over the harbour through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He would have changed out of his chinos and T-shirt, obviously. Perhaps he would be outlining some impending business reshuffle or takeover. The room would be filled with steely-eyed men in dark suits, all drinking iced water out of crystal tumblers. He'd have an impressive PowerPoint proposal to go through, and the others would nod and make notes in leather. Ping. Mum, I'm thinking of coming over to do my washing this weekend. Our machine's packed up. Dan, I told you, I'm going to Australia. Bloody hell. I'd forgotten. Sky's working all weekend at the wine bar. I'll have to go to Dad's, and Ashley has the wrong sort of washing powder. It brings me out in a rash. God forbid Ashley has the wrong sort of washing powder. Don't use it. Buy your own washing powder. Here's an idea. Go to a laundrette. Do your washing there. Are you really going to Australia? I'm at Heathrow. Definitely on my way to Australia. Why didn't you remind me? I did, several times. The last time was 2 days ago. I forgot. Smiley face. Mum, I haven't got a key for your house. No, I know. So how am I going to get in? You can't. You don't actually need to get in. Tiger mother, that's me, sending my cub out into the wilds with only a degree in maths, a teaching certificate, and a rudimentary knowledge of domestic appliances. Flippin' heck, Mum. Well, have a nice time. I intended to have a nice time. With any luck, I'd have a bloody marvellous time. I gave a snort of laughter and realised the nice-looking man sitting opposite me had stopped typing and was watching me. I felt my face flush. What must he think? Everything okay? He said. He was obviously trying hard not to laugh. Fine, I said, straightening my face. I have a habit of muttering when I'm texting and sometimes have a conversation with myself, voicing the things I don't actually type. What on earth had I been saying? Just a few last-minute things to clear up. Sounds like it. So, where are you off to? I'm going to Sydney to visit my aunt and uncle and my sister. I looked at my watch and felt a sizzle of anticipation. In an hour and a half. That sounds exciting. I'll be on your plane, he said. I live on the outskirts of Sydney. Amazing. This was going surprisingly well. Perhaps we would strike up a conversation about Australia, and he would tell me something about himself, and I would be interesting and engaging, and he would find me unexpectedly fascinating, and I would make him laugh. I pushed my fringe out of my eyes and sat up a bit straighter. The washing powder could be a problem, though, he said thoughtfully. Bugger. I could feel my face getting hot again. What else had I said? He typed for a few minutes and then snapped his laptop shut. First trip to Australia. I was born there, but I haven't been back for ages. My parents died years ago. We're only a small family, and my sister and I were brought up by my father's sister, my Aunt Maggie. She was 10 years younger than my dad. She and my Uncle Banjo have been to visit me a couple of times, and so has my sister. Is his name really Banjo? It's Bernard, but no one ever calls him that. Great name. We have Zoom calls and WhatsApp and Skype. He shook his head. But it's not the same, is it? I smiled and relaxed a bit, glad that he understood. No, it's not the same. My ex-husband hated flying and just refused. But now I'm single again and my son has his own flat and is reasonably independent, well, I can. I was talking far too much and saying the word sister a lot. All those years of keeping my opinions to myself had started to wear off in the time since Tom and I had separated and then divorced. Even so, I was being a bit garrulous, even by my standards. Did he need to know I was divorced? That I had a son, a sister, that my parents had died, that my aunt had been to visit me? No. I was being far too free with my personal details. He could be anyone. Australian businessman didn't seem to mind. He appeared to be listening with interest. That's excellent. Good for you. I hope you have fun. It's quite a trip, and I warn you the jet lag is just as bad as it ever was. And you? I said, realising we were just talking about me. And I wanted to know more about him. He seemed really nice and rather handsome. It was a long time since an attractive man like this had noticed me, or any man for that matter. He ran one hand over his hair, which was dark, shot through with streaks of silver. I make this trip quite frequently, far more often than I actually want to. Business. New South Wales is a beautiful part of the world, and Sydney is a wonderful city. Make sure you see the Rocks area and the Opera House, and Darling Harbour. You won't recognise it. There's been an incredible amount of development there since you left. Not to mention all the roads that have been built. It's very impressive. I will. I certainly will, I said eagerly. He gave me another smile, and then he stood up. I've just remembered. I have a couple of phone calls I must make, and I tend to shout and pace about. Enjoy your champagne and have a good trip, he said. He unplugged the cable again and loaded up his laptop bag. You too? I said. Had I said something to put him off? Pity. I was actually enjoying talking to him. I watched him walk away and then went back to my drink. Ping! Tom again. I know we have had our disagreements, but you could at least be civil. I sent a last text to Lizzie, telling her I had got to the airport safely, and then one each to my aunt and sister, telling them the same thing. And then I turned my phone off. Getting on the plane was very exciting indeed. The cabin crew were all helpful and smiling, and there was so much space. I couldn't believe it. I had my own little pod to sit in, slanted towards the window too, which made a change because on the few other flights I had known, Tom always insisted on sitting in the window seat so he could point out things I couldn't see, and wonder aloud if the wings were strong enough, that sort of thing. Then if Dan was with us, he would insist on the aisle seat, leaving me crushed in the middle between two man-spreaders and no armrest. What is the etiquette on armrests anyway? Surely I should have access to one, if not occasionally 1.5 in a fair world. This time I had 2 to myself. And shortly after that, a steward with a pair of tongs brought me a hot face towel in case getting on the plane had made me grubby. I happily wiped it over my face, forgetting I had carefully applied makeup that morning. Now the rest of the cool, hip business-class travellers would see that my complexion was probably blotchy with the champagne I'd knocked back. Oh well, I'd never see any of them again. I bet I wasn't the only one. I accepted a chilled bottle of mineral water and another glass of champagne, while outside the ground crew disappeared and the corridor connecting the plane to English air was pulled back. The captain introduced himself over the intercom and told us all about the cabin crew, who apparently spoke lots of languages and would attend to all our needs on the flight to Dubai. His voice was smooth and calm, and he sounded tall and capable, and he was probably very handsome too, with a finely chiselled jaw and a noble nose. Marvellous. For the first time since a school trip to Canberra, I was thoroughly enjoying myself on a plane. I could listen to the safety briefing, appreciate the massive thrust of the wheels on the tarmac, the stomach-swooping moment when we took off, and the sight of London disappearing beneath the clouds. Down there, people were getting on with their lives, their problems, sitting fuming in traffic jams on the M25, while I was soaring away above them with my mobile turned off and about 500 films to watch on the entertainment system in front of me. It did feel strange after a while, because I had no one to share this with. I hadn't really thought about that part. I had no companion to turn to and say how excited I was, discuss the meal choices or the wine we were served. No one to agree on the comfort of the seats, the marvellous amount of legroom, the abundance of armrests. After so many years, I was going to see my childhood home again. It was 7 years since I'd seen my family, and I was fizzing with excitement. I had no one with me to share my delight at going back to Australia. That sort of thing. What time was it anyway? I had no idea. Apart from everything else, the blinds in the cabin had been closed shortly after takeoff, and the lights were low. Perhaps they were hoping we would all go to sleep. Well, there was no chance of that. I wasn't going to waste a moment. Lunch was served with a great deal of flourishing napkins, and I had proper cutlery and an actual glass. Perhaps they thought that having spent all this money we were less likely to launch an unprovoked attack on each other. I wasn't entirely sure what I was eating because it was a sort of fusion thing. Chunks of chicken and something Thai and some salad, followed by an exquisite little cheesecake. I recognised that all right. After a few hours, the cabin crew left us in peace. I stopped pressing all the buttons on my entertainment system and making my electric seat go up and down to find the most comfortable position, and decided to investigate the loos. They were really nice, and had drawers filled with stuff for the unprepared business traveller. Individually wrapped combs, cotton wool balls, eye masks, and even bottles of expensive perfume to use. Amazing. Suitably refreshed and smelling gorgeous, I was about to go back to my seat when I heard laughter behind me and realised there was a bar. I mean, an actual bar at the back of the plane, and people were standing around chatting, eating snacks and drinking cocktails. What sort of heaven was this? The Elin of a year ago would probably have sloped off back to her seat. I would have probably made excuses for myself, questioned my right to be there. My years with Tom had somehow crushed a lot of my self-belief. Although crushed was probably the wrong word. It hadn't been as simple as that or as instant. Tom's campaign of making me feel unworthy, second-rate, was more a gentle but persistent squeeze over the years, so gradual that I hadn't really noticed. Today, after hesitating halfway through the red curtain, I went and joined them. I had paid my fare, arranged my visa, done everything myself. I was entitled to enjoy the experience, and of course from a health point of view, it was important to keep my circulation going on such a long flight. There were a couple of keen-looking chaps in striped shirts talking loudly about outsourcing the whole book and what were Gary and Patrick doing, for God's sake. I moved past them to stand next to a chic blonde woman draped in cream linen who was excavating the contents of her handbag over the rest of the seat. I ordered a marmalade martini. Well, I asked cream linen woman what she was drinking, and it looked suitably celebratory. The steward behind the bar gave me a charming smile and flourished a paper coaster onto the counter in front of me. "Does it actually have marmalade in it?" I asked, "because I don't really like it." He gave me a fleeting look that said, "Then why have you ordered it?" and then patiently explained the ingredients. Gin, Grand Marnier, lemon juice and orange zest, plus a very small amount of marmalade. I decided to risk it. It looked really colourful. I really should slow down a bit. At this rate, I would need a lie-down in a darkened room before I started dancing on the tables. Not that I ever had, but I've often wondered what it would be like. I don't think I could get away with it now, not at my age. A teenage girl dancing on the tables in a nightclub is one thing. Me doing it on a plane would be quite another matter. Knowing my luck, we would hit turbulence and I would slip and fall off and... Oh, never mind. "Ah, there you are. Enjoying your flight?" Oh, good heavens, it was him again. Nice-looking Australian man with the laptop and the cable. He had lovely hazel eyes, almost greenish. Annoyingly, I felt my face grow hot. Perhaps it was the alcohol, perhaps it wasn't. "Hello. Yes, I am, rather. It's the first time I've flown anything other than budget airlines in the small seats where nothing is included and your legs go to sleep. Well, not your legs, obviously, I mean my legs." Great, I was babbling again. He would think I was crazy, or drunk or something. Perhaps I was. I thought about it for a moment. No, I wasn't. And I should know. I'd been the designated driver for decades and had never got anywhere near squiffy, never mind actually drunk. Not even when my divorce papers came through and my sister had sent me a bouquet and a bottle of pink champagne to celebrate. It didn't seem to hit the spot at the time, and drinking a bottle of champagne on my own was a bit depressing. "Yes, it's good, isn't it?" he said. He jerked his head towards my cocktail. "What's that you're drinking?" I took a sip and coughed. "Marmalade martini." "Nice. Strong?" I wiped my eyes a bit. "I think I'll give it a miss," he said with a grin. With no apparent effort, funny that, he caught the attention of the stewardess who had dashed behind the bar to serve him and ordered a double espresso. I sighed and wondered, as I have so many times in my life, if it might be possible to rewind the tapes at this moment and start again, and do things properly. If it was, I would order a cappuccino and one of those nice-looking blueberry mini muffins in the basket on the bar. Apart from anything else, the cocktail was giving me a headache. Or perhaps it was the mixture of the champagne, wine, and this varied alcohol potion. And the steward hadn't used any measures, just slugged stuff into the cocktail shaker. Yes, that would explain it. I seemed to be making a lot of questionable choices with my newfound independence. Tom would have stopped me, I was sure of that, and Dan would have rolled his eyes at me and hissed, "Mom," in the usual way. But they weren't here, and for once I didn't care. So instead, feeling rather glamorous, I sipped my martini again and helped myself to some salted cashews from the porcelain bowl that the helpful steward had placed on the bar next to me. I waved a vague hand around. "So you always travel with this airline? I mean, have you tried others?" I couldn't decide when I was booking. Cream linen woman finished her martini, scooped all her clutter back into her bag, reapplied her crimson lipstick and stood up. The plane rocked slightly in a bit of turbulence. See, good job I hadn't climbed onto one of the tables. My companion gestured towards the comfortable-looking bench she had vacated, and we sat down together. It was rather exciting and totally unexpected. It was a long time since I'd done this sort of thing. The longest meaningful conversations I had shared with men recently were with my solicitor and the postman. This felt decidedly different. Was I flirting? Was he? How could I tell? What were the rules these days? What should I say? Up at the bar, the keen chaps were now talking in initials, something about RFIs and SOWs, sneering at poor Gary and Patrick's parentage and intelligence, and eating big slices of cake. I wondered where they'd got those from. Did I need a slice of cake too? Probably not at this precise moment, but I'd remember it for later on. After all, I was going to be here for a while. I've tried all the airlines over the years. I think this is the best one, he said. Certainly the most comfortable beds, because I'm quite tall. He was, too. Probably over 6 feet and broad-shouldered, rather impressive. I thought about asking a clumsy question about whether his wife agreed with him, but luckily thought better of it. I didn't want him to think I was flirting or potentially stalking. The thought was awful. Actually, I didn't quite know what I was doing. I wasn't the sort of woman to start engaging in personal conversations with strange men. But we were here now, and I couldn't exactly just walk off. He would have thought I was rude. "And what business are you in?" I said. I managed to spit out a crumb of cashew nut at this point. It landed on his chest. I froze in horror. "Sorry." I reached out a tentative hand. "IT systems," he said, brushing it off without comment. "I focus on providing bespoke business solutions for the intermediary sector within the financial services industry." I understood the individual words in this sentence, but not the bigger picture. I decided not to draw further attention to the cashew incident. "That must be fascinating," I said, trying to sound as though I had a clue what he was talking about. His eyes twinkled. "Well, it can be. My father started the company in the late 80s, and when he died, my brother and I inherited it. We have trebled the workforce, and it's doing well." "Good for you," I said. "It must have taken a lot of hard work and a great deal of determination." "I suppose it did," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "When I look back at it, which I don't very often, we've come a long way. What we were and where we are now. Perhaps I've forgotten. I could do without the travel, though. Flights and hotels. It's a terrible waste of time. I try to do Zoom calls as often as possible, but some people in the industry are still pretty old school and insist on face-to-face meetings, and then I can't get out of it." "I think it sounds thrilling to build something up like that. You must be doing a great job. But the travelling? Gosh, I love this plane. I've been so excited about this trip I haven't slept properly for weeks. I couldn't wait to get on board. Everyone is so nice, and the seats are so comfortable, and the food's good too. But I suppose if you do it all the time, then the novelty soon wears off. Still, I guess your brother can do it occasionally." My companion pulled a face that somehow made him look even more attractive. "That would be nice," he said at last. "If it ever happened." It was a sort of closing down statement. I felt I'd trampled onto dangerous territory. I sipped my rocket-fuel drink and tried to think of something intelligent to say. "By the way, what is an RFI?" He blinked a bit. "A request for information. Why do you ask?" "Just something I overheard. What's an SOW, apart from a female pig?" "A statement of work." At that moment, the keen chaps on the far side of the bar roared with laughter and ordered more whiskey. "Ah, I see." My companion grinned. He tilted his head towards them. "When they start talking about an MBOC, you know they're in trouble." I thought about it. My, board opposes change? He laughed. Material breach of contract. Ah, yes, that makes more sense. That doesn't sound good. We discussed the weather in Australia. He told me a little about the meetings he'd had. We agreed how awful the traffic was in London, and I confessed I hardly ever went there. On this trip he had visited the V&A and the Natural History Museum on his own, and he'd been taken to the theatre one evening by his business hosts. I felt a bit unsophisticated until he confessed he'd fallen asleep during the second act because he was so tired, and he laughed rather wistfully, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. I'd felt a bit isolated already, and this was the first and probably only time I would make this journey. What would it be like to do it every few months? It sounds lonely, I said. I'm beginning to see that. Yes, he said rather quietly. It can be. It doesn't sound much fun at all when I think about it. He looked thoughtful. It's not. Look, would you like... He suddenly stopped and looked at his watch, an elegant gold thing, not like the massive multi-dialed chunks of metal most men seem to wear these days. No, I mustn't get distracted. I don't want to, but I have a lot of work to do and I really must get on, he said. No rest for the wicked. Oh dear, poor you. He finished his coffee and stood up. Well, have fun and make sure you get out and about. There are some lovely road trips you could take. See Queensland. The road to there has been upgraded, and the Blue Mountains are just as wonderful as they ever were. I will, I said, wondering if I would. He put his empty cup on the bar and went towards the red curtains that led to the cabin. He hesitated as though he wanted to say more. Well, I hope you enjoy your trip, he said. Perhaps, well, good day. I was more than a little disappointed as I watched him go, because after all I had been having an enjoyable chat with a handsome stranger. This made me feel unexpectedly optimistic. Apart from the cashew incident, I think I'd managed things really well. I went back to my seat and started watching Mission Impossible 4. That cheered me up. I love that sort of thing. The more special effects and car chases, the better. Chapter 2. We had about an hour's stopover in Dubai, and that was quite long enough for me. Definitely disorientated and feeling a bit weird, I had a walk around, following everyone who had got off my plane and hoping the person at the front of our flock knew where we were going. Everyone else seemed to have someone to talk to. Did they now realise I was travelling alone? Did they feel sorry for me? Or had I, like many sensibly dressed, comfortably shod women of my age, just disappeared off the radar? There were a lot of gorgeous waterfalls and gold decoration, but there didn't seem to be many information boards. I found this very worrying. I'm the sort of person who thrives on information boards. The other concern was leaping to avoid the rather rude drivers who were beeping their horns and speeding in all directions through the terminal with electric carts filled with cross-looking men and their many wives and children. Eventually I made my way through fresh rounds of security and men squinting at my passport and having my cabin bag x-rayed again before we got back on another plane. Heaven knows what time it was. I had no idea. But when we got back onto the new plane, ready to settle down for the next leg of my trip, I found an elegant pochette filled with goodies on my seat. I hadn't expected that. It was filled with all sorts of really great stuff. Creams and potions and socks and an eye mask and a toothbrush and hand mirror. I was like a kid with a party bag. You didn't get that sort of thing on budget airlines. I had a go with a few of the wonderful smelling unguents, looking at myself curiously in the hand mirror to see if they'd had any effect. Then I spent a few minutes trying to work out the time difference. Did I need to take my cholesterol tablets? It might have been 9 o'clock at night as far as my brain was concerned, but a few minutes later they brought us breakfast, and I found myself eating scrambled eggs with spinach and nutmeg, and some fried potatoes and salad, and some cheese, and a pot of apricot yoghurt. And then a charming, smiling attendant came around with a basket of hot bread rolls and croissant. It was a meal that covered all the bases, and I didn't have to prepare it or clear it away either. After that, I went back to the bar just to stretch my legs. Actually, I was wondering if he would be there. Several people were still knocking back alcohol, and the same intense-looking chaps from the previous plane were still complaining about Gary and Patrick and drinking whiskey. The barman was trying to persuade people to eat more cake too. It was surreal. I refused the cake again, although it did look good. There was no sign of the handsome Australian businessman. Why hadn't I asked his name, or said something casual like, "Well, let's meet up later and you can tell me more about providing bespoke business solutions for the, whatever it was, sector within the thingy industry, because it's something I've always wanted to know more about." Maybe that would be pushing it a bit. Perhaps we had exhausted our conversation, and he didn't have anything else to say to me. Maybe he had, awful thought, felt sorry for me to be travelling alone. Possibly he did this all the time on his travels, just to fill in the time. Perhaps it was a sort of game. Maybe it had been a sympathy flirt, a pity flirt, if it had been a flirt of any sort. I went back to my seat, and after worrying if my luggage had followed me onto this plane, had a rather nice sleep on my electrically operated flat bed, wrapped in a soft grey blanket. My God, Australia is a long way. I mean a really, really long way. How could I have forgotten? I slept quite satisfactorily, and when I woke up there were still hours to go. I played around with the buttons on my seat again and took my earplugs out. Thank heavens I'd been given some in my goodie bag, because in the seat behind me a man was snoring. It put me in mind of the noise a cat might make if it was being forced through a trumpet. Then I looked at the flight tracker on my entertainment screen to find out where we were. We were somewhere over the Indian Ocean with nothing below us or near us for thousands of miles. I could almost imagine the long, lonely plunge down into the sea. Perhaps Tom had a point. Never wanting to leave us grubby, hungry or thirsty, the cabin crew came around with more hot towels, food, and carts laden with drinks and snacks. I managed to show some maturity and just had iced water, and then weakened and had a small cheese board, which was lovely but not exactly small. Then I watched 1.5 more films and had another snooze. I peered out of my window several times, but there was too much cloud covered to see anything, until a couple of hours later it cleared, and beneath us was a coastline. I looked at the flight tracker again, and it was true. It was my first glimpse of Australia for decades. I felt suddenly tearful, incredibly excited, and happy. The ocean was blue and rippled, a lone container ship ploughing along. I wondered if anyone on board would look up and wonder where this plane was going, anything about the people 37,000 feet above them, as I often did. Probably not. It was the first time since I met Tom that I'd travelled any distance on my own, and I'd forgotten how it felt. There was nothing to distract me. No phone calls or text messages, no interruptions from him or from anyone. I sat up a little straighter in my seat and felt brave and intrepid, which is not something I have felt for years. I could do this. Even at that moment, I knew I had achieved something momentous. I didn't need help or praise or interference. My life was taking a different path, and this was the first step. Now, I could just please myself all the time. Being on a journey that long was very odd. Sleep, Wake up, doze a bit, eat something, watch a film. I went to the loo without someone hammering on the door asking for a clean shirt. While I was there, I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked solemn and tired, but underneath it all, excited. I gave myself a broad smile. I liked feeling excited. There hadn't been that much excitement in my life for years. I peered towards my reflection. Had I always had those wrinkles? I spritzed myself with more free perfume, and no one reeled back and complained I was gassing them. We landed in Kingsford Smith Airport exactly on schedule as the sun was rising out into a cloudless sky. It was nothing short of miraculous as far as I was concerned. How did they do that? I don't think I'd ever been on a bus that arrived on time, and don't get me started on trains. Getting off the plane, I took a deep breath of Australian air for the first time in years. It seemed different somehow, although one air-conditioned airport is probably much the same as any other. Then I reassured the immigration people I wasn't bringing any vegetables, fruit, flies, or explosives into the country, and went to reclaim my suitcases. Not long now, and I'd meet up with Rowan again. I felt almost sick with excitement. I couldn't wait. I watched as the bags trundled round on the conveyor belt. People leapt forwards and reclaimed all sorts of weird-looking things. Massive cases wrapped in cling film, golf clubs in huge plastic boxes, bags big, small and in between, cardboard boxes covered in tape and marked fragile. Fat chance. Across the concourse I saw the handsome man from the plane grab a black case and wheel it off, peering at his phone as he did so. I gave a little wave, but I don't think he saw me. Or perhaps he did, but didn't have anything more to say to me. I don't suppose he wanted to be delayed by some random woman he didn't really know, making idle conversation with him about her holiday. He probably had important things to do. Well, so did I. Eventually, after a very long time, I was left watching a single tartan holdall making its embarrassed progress around as the machinery under it clunked and thumped. I tutted, walked around the baggage carousel and peered through the plastic flaps, hoping to see a helpful baggage handler. "My sister is waiting out there in arrivals," I wanted to shout. "Hurry up!" Then suddenly, with a flourish, my cases appeared. It looked as though someone had slung them contemptuously through the doors, which was a cheat because they were new and certainly smarter than a lot of the others. I raced to grab them. I hurried to the arrivals gate, and there, twitching with excitement, was my sister Rowan waiting for me with a big homemade placard on a stick covered in glitter and plastic flowers, which might have been nice if she hadn't been standing right in front of the doors, and if it hadn't read, "Welcome back from rehab, Elin." Rowan dropped the placard, which nearly clonked a passing pilot on the head, screamed and swept me up into a big hug. We sobbed incoherently into each other's shoulders for a bit, while other people arriving on the next flight read the placard and dodged round us. "I can't believe you're here at last. Where on earth have you been?" I wiped away my tears and explained about the problem with my suitcases. She didn't seem very bothered. "Never mind that. You made it. You're back at last. I'm so happy." She bounced up and down a bit with excitement, and so did I. I felt young again, like something had settled into place or a massive weight was being lifted. "I'm here," I agreed, feeling much better. "I'm actually here." She leaned back and looked at me. "Are you really shattered? Are you okay? You look almost grey, you poor thing." "Do I? Well, I have been travelling for a long time, and I think I'm as jet-lagged as it's possible to be." "Yes, I guess that's it. So what did Tom say? Did he try and stop you?" "I didn't tell him until I was at the airport and it was too late," I said. Good for you." Rowan gave me another hug, grabbed one of my cases and trundled it into people's ankles with unerring accuracy, talking all the way. "Come on, the car's over here. At least I think it is. Or it might be over there. If we hurry, it'll only cost $30. It should have been 10, but you took so long. I couldn't wait to see you. I've hardly slept a wink." She stopped in the middle of the road and hugged me again. We rocked back and forwards for a bit, squeaking our excitement, until someone tooted impatiently at us and we hurried on into the car park. Rowan drove us carefully out of the airport, through a huge civic rebuilding plan. Everywhere there were massive yellow trucks, hundreds of traffic cones, and men in high-vis jackets and hard hats staring into colossal holes propped up with steel girders. This was interspersed with stretches of new motorway that were equally as fast, crowded, and complicated as anything in England. I don't know what I had expected. Something smaller or simpler, perhaps. Obviously, I was way out of touch with my homeland. But then, I hadn't been back for such a long time. I felt a bit tearful again, and very annoyed with myself. How had I let that happen? We'd had a comfortable home, enough money for a decent lifestyle, and yet my opinions, my preferences, my life hadn't seemed to be as important as his. Why had I allowed Tom to be so controlling and not really noticed it? Rowan had always had the ability to talk continuously and at speed, and nothing had changed. She chatted all the way as we left the motorway and onto smaller roads leading to a place I hadn't seen for years, Kookaburra Bay. I leaned forward in my seat, delighted by the advertising hoardings, the road signs, the houses filled with Australians, thrilled to be back, longing to see the Pacific Ocean again, remembering the summers I had spent there with a gaggle of school friends. It seemed another age. I remembered us trying to bleach our hair with lemon juice, talking about boys, and all of us absolutely desperate to leave Australia and see the world. And what had I done? Got my qualifications, gone to England, found a teaching job, and married my head of department. A man who increasingly stopped being easygoing and fun. A man who was happiest controlling everything, and who had feigned a strange and unnamed illness every time I tried to arrange a trip back home. Why had I let him get away with it? I suppose, like the Australian man growing his business, it didn't seem quite so bad at the time. But thinking about it, well, my life now was different. I had new chances. The rest of my life was ahead of me. I should stop looking back. "Maggie and Banjo can't wait to see you. Banjo phoned me this morning to tell you they'll be back this afternoon. Maggie says she can't concentrate on anything with all the excitement," Rowan said as we started the swerving descent towards the coast. "They've been away? Where have they been?" "Ballarat. For a wedding party yesterday, otherwise they would have been at the airport with me. A couple of their friends have tied the knot after being together for 42 years, and they wanted to find out more about the Eureka Rebellion. Well, you know them, always tempted by a bit of civil disobedience." "Are they okay?" I asked. "Absolutely. Banjo's a stubby short of a six-pack from time to time, but Maggie says it's just him being evasive. 73 is nothing over here. They're both in fine form. Now then, don't forget to look." I looked, and there it was, that fabulous, wonderful view down to the Pacific I remembered. I'd been on Google Earth many times over the years so I could see it. Every time it made me gasp, just as it did today. A glorious, undulating landscape of trees, and then beyond it mile upon mile of golden sand, turquoise sea, and creamy spray. A few surfers looking like black dots bobbing about on the water beyond the breaking waves.